With a deadline missed to secure peace in eastern Congo, will gains be reversed? M23 forces and the Congolese government failed to finalize proposals laid out in Qatar last month. The M23 claims Kinshasa doesn't want peace, while the government says rebels have continued daily attacks in spite of a ceasefire. So are innocent civilians destined to suffer, or can a compromise be found? I'm Andrea Sankey, and this is the Newsmakers. Well, it seemed like a breakthrough in Qatar last month, especially after the United States took credit for brokering desperately needed peace between Rwanda and the DRC in June. But on Monday, the deadline passed for M23 rebels, whom many say are fully backed by Rwanda, to finalize a peace agreement with the Congolese government. Rwanda, of course, denies any backing of the M23, but as long as their armed assaults continue and the government continues to fight them, there will be no peace in eastern Congo. So where, if anywhere, could there be a compromise? And are the roles of foreign powers playing peacemaker or agitator? Here's a look.
In the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, gunfire still drives people from their homes, even as leaders promise peace. The latest push for peace came on the 19th of July. Kinshasa and the M23 rebels under Qatari mediation signed a declaration of principles. It committed both sides to a ceasefire and to a full agreement by the 18th of August. That deadline has now passed, without a deal. It's one of two peace accords designed to ease the crisis in the East. The first, a US brokered agreement with Rwanda, long accused of backing M23. The second, this direct deal with the rebels themselves, billed as a breakthrough, but now adrift. Fighting escalated sharply in January when M23 seized large parts of North Kivu, including the regional capital, Goma. The offensive has displaced more than 300,000 people so far this year, and the toll keeps mounting. In July alone, the United Nations reported 319 civilians killed in M23 attacks.
All attacks against civilians must stop immediately, and all those responsible must be held to account. UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Volker Turk renews his call on all parties to the conflicts in eastern DRC to protect civilians from harm and to uphold all their obligations under international humanitarian law and international human rights law.
For ordinary Congolese, these broken promises are lived in hunger and exhaustion.
This is the suffering that welcomes us, spending nights outside. Here we sleep outside some offices. No blankets, no mattresses, and without humanitarian support. Since the death of our husbands.
In the capital, anger mounts. The president's turn to dialogue with M23 is stirring unease, a decision many see as a betrayal of his earlier stance.
Why are we going to dialogue? With whom and why? The president decided years ago that he will never dialogue with thugs, thieves and killers. And today, when he agrees to have a dialogue with these people, he had described in this way: where are we going? Why has he accepted? And what will it bring to the life of Congolese people?
The two agreements, struck just weeks apart, were meant to steady Congo's east. The one with Rwanda still formally in place, but slow to take root. The other, with M23 rebels in Doha, its deadline now missed. On the ground, it is the ongoing fighting that still sets the terms. Ceasefires unravel, confidence thins, and the promise of peace slips away further from reach.
So while peace agreements struggle, human rights groups continue documenting horrific abuses in eastern DRC, both by M23 rebels as well as groups backed by the Congolese army. So joining me now to debate where the current proposals really stand are, from Leicester in the UK, lawyer and DRC political affairs analyst Michael Tshibangu. From Nashville, Executive Director of the African Great Lakes Action Network, Claude Gatebuke, and from Pretoria, South Africa, geopolitical analyst and former South African diplomat to Rwanda, Botsang Moiloa. Thanks all so much for being with me. Michael, I'll start with you. And tell us if you think the deals brokered over the past months have served the interest of peace or have effectively fallen apart, especially with the M23 walking away from the latest agreement.
Well, we can say that the deal have falling apart or is in the process of falling apart because since Rwanda has signed the agreement with DRC, on the ground nothing much has changed. Each party seems to have its own understanding. And with regard to the M23, because there were separate negotiations between the Congolese government and the M23, that also appears to have stalled with each party accusing the other. They restarted the process. I heard that Qatar has put forward a draft agreement for all parties to look at and trying to find a way of moving forward. But so far, the signs are not encouraging. There are still a lot of big things that they disagree on. Okay,
so Claude, Michael says nothing has changed, but it's still not totally clear how there could be kind of a celebrated U.S. brokered peace agreement between Rwanda and the DRC if the M23 wasn't included in the first place and was and is still fully active. Was it perhaps a way for Rwanda to say, still, we have nothing to do with M23, so they shouldn't be at the table with us, and you can try to negotiate a separate deal with them, even though it's all really connected?
That's right. The deal in Washington, D.C. basically and especially this deal now in Qatar, is letting Rwanda off the hook. What is happening in the Congo is a war of aggression and invasion by Rwanda and Uganda, and they use proxy militias like the M23. The M23 has no power unless it's backed by Rwanda's government army or Uganda's military. Without those two, there is nothing. So the negotiations really should be between Rwanda, Uganda, and Congo in order for there to be lasting peace. Lastly, the peace deal does not include anything about justice. And what this deal is a recycle of many other deals that have been done in the past. And the definition of insanity, as I've heard, is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. This has been tried before. It is high time that actually justice is put forward and the people's voice are put forward. At this point, it just lets Rwanda off the hook for the atrocities committed in the Congo.
I'd like to talk more about justice and accountability in a minute, but let me go to Botsang first, because you had actually said months ago when we spoke, even before the U.S. deal had been really formalized, that excluding M23 from any talks means those talks are not going to work. So are we effectively seeing exactly what you had predicted, given they weren't party to the U.S. brokered deal in Washington?
Exactly, and good afternoon from South Africa. Exactly, Andrea. In any war situation or wherever there's conflict, no matter how less important you think the other party is, diplomatically, you cannot exclude them in engaging in a peace settlement agreement. M23 is playing a very vital role, whether backed by Rwanda or not, whether we agree with that or not. It's immaterial. The material factor is just simply thinking that having a peace deal or an agreement with the Republic of Rwanda and not directly with M23 or involving M23, it's not going to help the situation. And I think the efforts to try and bring the M23 group onto the table and as part of the problem, they must also be part of the solution. It can aid the process in the DRC. And I think the efforts of the US or Qatar in this instance are very important. It will also be crucial to can have all three parties signing one agreement and sitting on the same table and not engaging them separately. I don't think it will work diplomatically to do that.
Okay. I mean, Michael, are you on the same page there? And I'm wondering what you make of Claude saying that Rwanda has effectively been let off the hook in some of these agreements, and also that Uganda is another party that should be involved in these processes, because M23 is still there. It's still getting its weapons from somewhere. I don't understand how if all parties aren't coming to the table, an effective peace can be brokered.
Yes, I totally agree that with the separation of the issue, Rwanda has effectively been able to argue that its problem is just the FDLR and that the M23 are a Congolese problem. And then this is where we have now Rwanda dealing with other issue, and then M23 saying that they are a totally different group that has nothing to do with Rwanda. And we're seeing that things are not moving forward. The approach should have been a more inclusive approach. I agree with what he has said, particularly with the fact that countries like Uganda are left out, despite the fact that there are evidence that Uganda itself also has been supporting militias in DRC for its own end. So by going the way that they have gone, it's no surprise that we are seeing what we are seeing today. Things are not moving forward, and yes, Rwanda has been let off the hook that way, and I don't expect things to get better. We've been here before with different agreement, and this time it appears to be even worse than what we've seen before, because there has been a lot of reports that have effectively demonstrated that those armed groups do receive support from countries like Rwanda and Uganda. So to treat it as a separate issue is just missing the point, really. Is letting those countries off the hook.
Okay, then Claude, help us understand, because I mean, the U.S. Washington brokered deal is still being separated out, Claude, and it's being considered a success. So is it considered a success in the way that the United States believes it can still provide internal security for at least the areas where there is mining and extraction being done? Is that how they're separating that?
Since that agreement, there's actually been atrocities by the M23 in areas just a few weeks ago. Within the last couple of weeks, there was a report released that shows that more than 300 civilians were killed in areas that are occupied. So that peace deal has not held to begin with. The other thing is that, yes, it's a win for U.S. companies that are going to benefit from plundered resources in the Congo, because this is about a minerals deal. It isn't actually about peace, because communities that have been terrorized by the invasion of Congo by Rwanda and Uganda, who are U.S. allies, financed by who receive aid, military aid as well, from the U.S., from the European Union, and from the U.K., continue to go into the Congo and wreak havoc. Now, I will say this. In 2013, the M23 was defeated in major part because donor partners actually withheld aid from Rwanda. There is no M23 without Rwanda and Uganda's backing. This is not a rebel that can stand on its own. And that peace deal in Washington is more about American companies accessing the minerals than it is about actually bringing peace and stability. The occupation cannot continue. As long as these areas are occupied, the terrorized population would not return home. And that is not a definition of peace. And peace is not the absence of just shooting. It's the absence of justice, and I repeat that word, justice.
Right, and I'm going to get to that in a second. But Botsang, I mean, it's all intertwined now. So can there be safe and lawful mining in Eastern DRC, because they are proving to be major players? There's major government backing behind these mining operations, and there's major multinational corporations there. Can it be safely and lawfully done with respect to local populations and justice?
Do not think there will be justice to the local people and it will still be safe. I think we all agree that this is not about the local people to benefit or peace. This is mainly about the extraction of the minerals by foreign companies, particularly the EU and the Americans. And for the USA to rise and broker this peace on condition, and remember, one of the conditions that the US has put into place is that Rwanda must move out of the DRC so that they can provide, security. But that security, I don't think, Andrea, it is for the people of the DRC. I think it is for the companies and the personnel they'll be deploying there to continue, mining the minerals in the DRC. And we know history where America has, operated militarily, whether for minerals or in inverted commas, what they claim to be a peace deal. Well, what happens, after they mine the minerals, whether it's oil and whatever, they will leave the place, disgruntled, and the people will be left with nothing. But coming to the point of justice, I understand the concern of the gentleman when he says peace without justice is irrelevant. However, I think in separating the matters and dealing with them separately, it will aid the situation. For example, if peace is established, Rwanda has moved out, and if any international organization or criminal court decide to prosecute any person that is deemed to have been involved in, it's equal to genocide, what has been happening for over 20 years in the DRC. Let that process run separately under a peaceful environment to try and get all the parties to the table and attain peace and prosecute people at the same time. It will actually throw us all out again. And I think if we segment them, it will work out much better when a peace settlement has been reached and an agreement.
Okay. So, Claude, I know you have a point to make there, because you have to ask how important the justice and accountability is right now in order to move forward. I mean, could they try perhaps with an amnesty for the time being for those who've arguably committed war crimes, which have been committed on all sides so horrifically, in order to move forward now and then explore the justice and accountability later?
I don't think that's a formula that would work, because that's the formula that's been used in the past and hasn't worked for the last 30 years. Every time there is a peace deal, there is amnesty included in these peace deals. Again, what we are seeing brokered by Qatar, what we're seeing brokered by the US is no different than other peace deals that have been brokered in the past. The M23 in its previous incarnation, again, when we talk about the M23, the reason why I continue to insist it's an invasion by Rwanda and Uganda is because it's the same players who are using the same playbook for many, many years, for decades actually, and continuing to basically change names. The M23 is the latest names, and they seem to be changing now to the AFC and eventually to something else. But we have to really keep our eyes on the target. And without by continuing to give amnesty, the people who committed crimes are incentivized to go back and commit more crimes. And this is what's happened in the past. Past offenders have been integrated into government positions and then have come back at times either on the side of the government or back into these rebel groups and continue to wreak havoc against civilians until there is actually this accountability. Until people are held accountable for the crimes that they are committing, the next generation will come forward and will do the same thing, commit the same crimes, and get amnesty and continue to get away with it, as long as they have the support of these regional countries, Rwanda and Uganda, with the support, of course, of their global puppet masters, the US, the UK, and the European Union.
Okay, please let me bring Michael in. Botsang, let me just bring Michael in, and I'll get right back to you. I mean, Michael, you seem to also believe that that's true. And is that also perhaps why the release of prisoners that had been agreed to was not carried out, because both sides do not want to see people they believe have committed such severe war crimes released back into the population?
Absolutely. It's a recipe that hasn't produced success. Over the past 30 years, there has been all sorts of agreements which included amnesty, the provisions for amnesties. And then, unfortunately, what ended up happening was that those people who were responsible for crimes became generals in the army and sometimes ministers. And afterward, it became difficult for them to be prosecuted. And becoming ministers, I mean, they were empowered with the power that they had. They went back on the ground and continued. So it's a vicious circle. And this time around, impunity cannot continue. They cannot do the same thing and expect to have different resources. It is important that all those people who are responsible for crimes in the east of DRC be held accountable. That will also send a message to other people who might be tempted because when people see criminals becoming generals in the army, criminals being rewarded, they will be tempted to do the same things. This is one of the reasons why we have so many armed groups in DRC. It's not just the M23. The M23 is the one group that can actually hold ground cities, but there are many other groups as well that are terrorizing the population. It's a bit of a lawlessness that reigns in that part of the country, which also could mean that one way of resolving this problem is also to ensure that DRC has a government that can actually protect its country, its citizen. Without addressing that issue, anybody can create an armed group and destabilize those parts of DRC.
Okay.
This is why.
Okay, Botsang, go ahead.
What I wanted to say was, despite or amidst the amnesty deal that the gentlemen are opposed to, that the people will be back with their community or the society. What I'm not getting from the two colleagues is, what is it that is being proposed different? I hear they are saying some of these things have been practiced in the past and we literally fail as a nation. But what is the proposal, the alternative do we have on the table? Because we have had the United Nations, we are now having the US, we have had, Qatar on the table, and many other countries. The Southern region was involved in the whole thing, and it seems it did not work. I appreciate the fact that they are saying there are other militia groups that are offsprings within the DRC, but I don't hear anybody coming with a solution to say, but what could be the solution in this instance? We still have the United Nations, forces there, a peacekeeping force, but it seems they're being defeated or they are not, winning this whole battle. And I'm trying to figure out if we are not going to give amnesty to take the past and shift it aside. And I'll use the South African, Truth and Reconciliation Commission as an example, that if people need peace and they do not prepare to forgive and to put the past on the side in order to map the way forward, we will have a problem in attaining peace. That's my view in this. Some way, somehow, one has to give or compromise in order to reach a negotiated political settlement.
Right, but Claude, one might argue that the Truth and Reconciliation in South Africa did not come off the back of years and years of massacres and horrific war crimes that have been documented left and right by human rights groups and are still ongoing.
Yes, that's right. We are talking about a 30-year ongoing genocide of people, more than 6 million people since 1996. So the last 30 years. And so this is not comparable. Also, the proposal, there is the UN Resolution 2776, which calls for Rwanda to leave the Congo with no preconditions. That's the starting point. Secondly, when countries invade other countries, there are actually international mechanisms. This is a violation of international law. And so that should also be applied. Those are the alternatives. Now, holding those accountable, starting with things like sanctions, arms embargo, even isolation. South Africa, apartheid South Africa, going back to South Africa, apartheid South Africa regime was barred. South Africa was barred from participating in a number of international things.
Heavy international sanctions, yes.
That's right. And isolation. When those things happen, actually accountability starts there. But as long as you are rewarding the criminals from committing crimes and you're giving them more resources, when you give a criminal resources, they commit more crime. And when you give them incentive to actually continue and impunity to continue doing this, they continue doing that. And so that is my proposal. It's not my own. It's not just my own. This is what the people want. And until that happens, we have not tried everything necessary to bring about peace.
Quickly, because speaking of the dynamics, we only have 2 minutes left, and I need to ask you about this because you seem most familiar with the militia groups that are on the ground. We know now that Daesh, or ISIS as some refer to it, is becoming more and more active in the region. How is that confusing the dynamics? We just had a report that 52 people were killed just last week in North Kivu province by Daesh-backed groups.
Oh yeah, it's definitely bringing about even more, not only more confusion, but more chaos. People are less safe, and the more insecure the place is, the more these types of groups can spring up and do their activities. And now you're going to see even more kidnappings, more horrible atrocities of the people. And again, this can only be contained by holding accountable those who are the perpetrators. I mean, are we going to talk about Daesh in next year's peace deal as now getting amnesty? And that's where the issue of the accountability really is like central to making sure this is resolved. And it's hard for a state to build capacity when it's under siege and occupation. And of course, the government in Congo has to and needs to and must be a government that actually can protect the people, that builds capacity to protect the people. Again, that requires what is happening in the Congo is a global issue, and it requires a global effort.
Okay, Michael, I'm sorry, a quick 30 seconds for your final thoughts.
Yes, absolutely. The government of DRC also has to play its part. It has to step up. Congo is such a rich, wealthy country, and without a strong army, without security, there will always be people be tempted to come and loot. So yes, one of the solutions will be to call on the Congolese government to step up its effort to build a stronger army, a stable country. And that's why we put forward the idea of a national dialogue.
Okay, that will have to be the final word for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd sincerely like to thank all three of my panelists for sharing your opinions and insights, and our viewers, of course, for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on social media, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.